Hello, good evening, and welcome to the KaiDES conference. We're going to give people maybe 30 seconds or so just to get into the room. So bear with us just for a little while longer. This is new technology to a lot of people, not least myself. So again, just let's give people a little time to get organized. I can see that people are joining through. Okay, hopefully everybody is now ready to go. So again, I just would like to say hello to everyone. My name is David Naylor, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. And I really just want to say a massive welcome to everybody and to say how happy I am to have you with us this evening. So this event, it's the Introduction to Domestic Abuse. It's part of 16 days of action to end gender-based violence. The Kent Integrated Domestic Abuse Service have 16 events running between now and the 10th of December to inform, educate, and inspire action so that we can make domestic abuse everybody's business. Because domestic abuse is everybody's business and everyone can make a difference, which is just what you're doing by attending today. So again, thank you for being with us this evening. So during the event, you're able to use the Q&A box on your screen to ask questions for Tina Alexander, who's our presenter this evening. As moderator, I will publish these and then I'll ask them at the end of the session. But I really would encourage you to ask the questions as we're going along, because if you're anything like me, you can forget. So please do pop them in when they come to mind. Tina is going to be speaking for approximately 30 minutes, and then we're going to have 30 minutes of questions. And I really just want to note that your email confirmations show the webinar is slightly longer, and that's just so that we don't get off on the system. You can use a thumbs up underneath the question to upvote it, and if that's something that you'd like to ask too. If you'd like to ask a follow-up on a question that you've asked, or a follow-up on a question that you've indicated that you like, please just preface that question with the words follow-up. So that just leaves me with the wonderful job of introducing Tina, who I'm very happy to work alongside as part of KaiDES. Tina Alexander is the head of operations for Oasis Frontline Services. She volunteered with the charity over 20 years ago, and today oversees the delivery of Marek, community, and young people's services across East Kent. Tina was one of the first qualified IDVAs in Kent, oversaw the implementation of the specialist domestic violence courts across Kent, and took a lead role in Kent Domestic Abuse Consortium's whole county IDVA service. We are really lucky to have Tina with us today. She's an incredibly knowledgeable person, and I know that you will find the event really useful to your better understanding of domestic abuse. Tina, if I could pass to you, please.
Thank you, David. Well, I've got to live up to that now, haven't I? So that's the problem before I even start. It's very odd to be sitting and talking to myself because that's exactly what I'm doing. So I don't have any knowledge of who you are that's sitting in your front rooms, probably listening to what I'm saying. Firstly, let me tell you that my boss wrote that introduction as to who I am and where I come from. The introduction that I wrote says that actually I lived in the refuge 23 years ago that I'm sitting at the moment. So probably gives me a little bit of an area of knowledge that's possibly different from anybody else that's been speaking today. So that's the point that I come from right at the beginning of this, is that I was a victim of domestic abuse. And I am going to use the words victim because actually I prefer to be known as a victim of domestic abuse. I'm very proud to have achieved all that I've achieved despite somebody else doing something that wasn't kind to me. So I am going to use the word victim, and for anybody that would rather have the word survivor, I do apologise, but it's very personal to me. I'm proud that I'm able to do what I am today because of what I suffered for quite a number of years. I am going to talk about domestic abuse. That's why you've signed up. And we are going to go through what the definition is, and we're going to be looking at different types of domestic abuse and what that looks like. So for anybody that feels that this has become maybe a little bit personal to them and they want to leave, At the end of this presentation, there's going to be details of a phone line that you can call. But just to give you that number now, because if you need to leave early, you're not going to be able to access the phone line. The telephone number, if you wanted to talk to someone right now, is 0808 168 9111. And I'll read it again, because if you're anything like me, you're now fumbling around for your phone thinking, I didn't get that. It's 0808 168 9111. And you're going to get to speak to somebody from victim support. So they make referrals on to services across Kent if that's necessary. So if anything that I say today links with your world, then please feel free to give them a call. They'll be waiting for your call. So what we're going to look at today is what domestic abuse looks like. So what's the actual definition, which I am going to read from a piece of paper, because even 23 years of doing this job, I would never be able to remember it. But what that really means, because it's very easy to read a Home Office definition of what domestic abuse looks like, it's not quite so easy when you're suffering that or want to understand those people that are suffering domestic abuse. We're going to also talk about things that you might notice. So if you are a friend or a family member of somebody that you might think is a victim of domestic abuse, then absolutely there are things that you're going to know and things that you might be able to do. So we're going to cover that as well. We're going to talk about how to ask, because it's very difficult, isn't it, if you've got a friend or family member or maybe a work colleague that you want to talk to because you're concerned about them. So we're going to mention how to ask, what the barriers are to victim engagement, what we want as victims, and the advice that you can give. Now, you're going to sit listening to me for 30 minutes, and you are absolutely not going to be an expert on domestic abuse by the end of this, and nor should you be. As brilliant as I might be in the next 30 minutes, or not, as the case may be, and we'll find out, actually, you don't have to give that advice. You just have to know where to go to get that advice. So if that's what you've learned by the end of this, is the telephone numbers to ring, well, then absolutely my job has been done. So whether or not you're a victim yourself, whether or not you're working with victims of domestic abuse, or whether you're just a hairdresser, and I don't mean just a hairdresser because they're very much needed around the county at the moment, who wants to be able to support someone that comes into your place of work, you will be able to know where to refer afterwards. So, and that will be my job done if that's the case. So, to start with, the definition of the Home Office definition of domestic abuse is any incident or patterns of incidents of controlling, coercive or threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged between 16 and over who've been intimate partners or family members, regardless of age, gender or sexuality. This can encompass, but is not limited to, the following types of abuse: psychological, physical, sexual, financial and emotional. Controlling behaviour is a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate and or dependent by isolating them from sources of support, exploiting their resources and capacities for personal gain, depriving them of the means needed for independence, resistance and escape, and regulating their everyday behaviour. And coercive behaviour is an act or a pattern of acts of assault, threatening, humiliation and intimidation, or other abuse that's used to harm, punish or frighten their victim. And this definition includes so-called honour-based violence, female genital mutilation and forced marriage. And it's clear that victims are not confined to one gender or ethnic group. There's a very good reason why I can't remember it all, because it's quite a lot to say, isn't it? And over the next couple of slides, we're going to be looking at what this actually looks like. But there's a difference between a bad marriage and an abusive relationship. And that difference is the intention. So if the intention by the perpetrator is to control, well, then that's going to be domestic abuse. If it's a household where there's a lot of arguments but no control, well, then that's probably a bad marriage and you need to get out of it. And if you think I'm a grandparent to a teenage granddaughter, there's quite a lot going on to try and control that 17-year-old in the household, I can assure you. That doesn't make me a perpetrator of domestic abuse. It means that I'm battling terribly hard to try and instill some boundaries in someone that's batting against me. So it's very much about your intention in the first place as to whether or not that's domestic abuse. So to start with coercion and control, that's going to be about making or carrying out threats to be able to control somebody else. So that could be making threats to self-harm or commit suicide. And that's something that we often have if we're working with high-risk victims of domestic abuse, where there might be suicidal threats with which to control that victim, because none of us as human beings want to know of somebody else's death, be responsible for somebody else's death. And particularly if we've got children, you're never going to want to have their father or their mother killing themselves as a consequence of us not doing what's wanted. So absolutely, it's a really impactful way to control us, is to threaten to kill yourself. And it's one of the things that we do have to make sure that if that's a really serious threat, somebody's got mental health problems or is feeling really low, and actually that might be a reality for that person, we must always ensure that we're having welfare checks done. So is there somebody else that you could send round? Could you send an ambulance or the police round to somebody if you believe that their intention is to harm themselves? We wouldn't though recommend that the victim goes, because actually that could be a clear tactic to get you back into the family home and then resume that relationship. Revenge porn, that's something that absolutely we see in our young people. So we know that the definition of domestic abuse is for those people aged 16 and above. We work with, across the county, there are children's services working with young people, and we know that actually domestic abuse happens before that age. So revenge porn is something that I'm not on Facebook or Instagram or any of those things, and I'm very glad of it actually. When you know how much control there can be as a result of revenge porn. I know my own son has pictures of his wife on his phone that every time she rings him, she looks very beautiful. Actually, are those pictures that are could be used against her sometime in the future? Well, I would hope not, but in innocence, our young people send pictures and they very much can be used against you. Threats to out you. If you're in a gay relationship, have you told your friends and family that you're in a gay relationship? Well, maybe not. So actually, that's something that could be used against you. Threatening to tell friends or family members or put messages on Facebook about you. Again, that could be revenge as well, couldn't it? So that's going to be a way in which to control you, because we know, particularly for our young people, sometimes it is difficult in a new relationship. If you're in a new gay relationship, new relationships are difficult at the best of times, but when that's something that can be used against you, very much that would be coercion and control. Lots of reporting you to other people. We work with victims who often do things that might normally not be their behaviours. Maybe they're doing something illegal, maybe they are taking drugs and have got drugs in the house as a coping strategy. So the very mere fact of reporting you to social services, reporting you to the police, that's going to be terrifying for any mum or any dad who doesn't want any interventions in their world. So none of us want social services working with us. Some of us need social services for the support that they can provide, but actually most people are quite afraid of the consequences rather than welcome the support that can be given. So again, a really good tactic if we're going to try and control somebody. We know very often that we call the police because there has been an incident of violence. And why we call the police is because we want that violence to stop. Often we're not considering that there are going to be future steps from that. So, for example, you're going to have to give a statement to the police. You're potentially then, if there is a criminal case, you're going to have to go to court. We don't consider those things often. We just want the abuse to stop. Or maybe we didn't even call the police. Maybe it was the next door neighbour that called the police on your behalf. So, of course, there were going to be attempts by the perpetrator to get us to drop the charges. And sometimes that works. and sometimes that doesn't, but it is very likely that there's going to be a push for us to withdraw our charges with the police. Involving us in illegal activity, I've already mentioned. Threats to kill us, that's really quite an impactful act of control. It's the one thing that's going to make us likely to stay in an abusive relationship, because we're going to be too fearful to leave. And of course, for some of us that don't have children, our whole world is around our pets, our cats, our dogs. My granddaughter's just got a ferret. Maybe that's the ferret that's everything to you in your world. So threats to harm our animals, threats to remove our animals, our children, those things are going to be absolutely impactful on someone who is lonely and isolated. So again, another tool for controlling us. Economic abuse. It is extremely likely that if you're a victim of domestic abuse, there's going to be economic abuse. Preventing someone from working, because there is that paranoia that if you're going to work, then what are you saying? What are you doing? Taking and controlling the money. So is every penny put into the perpetrator's bank account? Is money being used for drugs and alcohol? That's very possible in abusive relationships. Maybe there's secrets around the family income. You know, have you ever thought to yourself, I don't really understand how the money goes down so quickly? Where is that money going? And it's something we would recommend to victims, is that you attempt to squirrel away little bits of money if you can, so that you've got some money for yourself. But if you're noticing that money is going out of the bank that you didn't know was going, doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a relationship with the perpetrator. It could be that they need some financial help themselves, or maybe, as has happened to a colleague, she noticed money going, and actually there's a very big diamond now on her hand, and she's very excited about that. So actually there was nothing bad about that. That was very lovely. It's about those secrets though, isn't it? You know, relationships are supposed to be built on trust, and if there's lots of secrets going on, then that would be of concern. Not providing you basic money for food. You know, are you not able to feed your children as well as you would like? We know that anyone's on benefits is going to really struggle to be able to provide really good food for their children. If that money isn't enough, then what are you going to do to be able to provide food, particularly today when COVID is preventing us from working so often? Using money for drugs or alcohol, there isn't enough money for drugs and alcohol in any household, I would suggest. So that is going to be having financial impact. Are you not going to be able to pay your rent? Is there going to be no money left over to be able to provide school uniform, new shoes for your children? Loans and debts in the victim's name, it's really difficult for us to be able to unpick whether or not those loans were taken out by yourself or by somebody else. And of course, that affects everybody's credit rating for the future. You know, this is a massive impact, your financial abuse. We've had stories of people that have had to take pictures of their shopping trolleys at the end of every aisle in Tesco's. So that impacts on the money that they're spending and the time that they're in the shops. So financial abuse makes it very difficult for you to leave, very difficult for you to be able to get any, even on a bus, to be able to go somewhere else. So massively impactful economic abuse. Intimidation. That's going to be about creating fear by using looks. And we know that you actually, when you're being intimidation, you get bigger. You physically look as if you're getting bigger. Often there's going to be that stare that you would receive as a victim of domestic abuse. So not only does your physical size get bigger, but you become, in your body language, you become really frightening to somebody else. Is it that there's going to be punches that miss your head and actually go into the walls? That's a great way to intimidate us and make us frightened, because we know that 20 centimeters from that wall was our face, and we could have been injured in that way. So those actions or gestures, pacing backwards and forwards, is an action that we might think about with intimidation. Sulking is another act of intimidation, and it's that thing that makes us walk on eggshells as victims of domestic abuse, because we don't know what's coming next. We often don't know what we've done wrong, if in fact we've done anything wrong at all, which is likely. So sulking keeps us on the edge of our seat to make sure that we do exactly what we're told to do. Destroying our property, abusing our pets, and bragging about previous abuse, so that terrifies us as what people are capable of. So All of those things are intimidation. None of that is physical. It hasn't actually landed an assault to us, but all of that is physical body language that's going to make us fearful. And therefore, putting that control, displaying weapons, breaking into our properties, all of those things would sit alongside intimidation. Isolation, moving us from place to place to make sure that we're not in contact with our friends and family, breaking into our friendship groups. I mean, the greatest way really is sleeping with your best friend, because who are you going to choose? Your husband when you've got 4 children, your wife when you've been together for 30 years, both of which could be perpetrators, or your best friend? You're probably going to lose your best friend. Access to social media, again, taking that away from you isolates you from your friends and family. Even hiding the car keys. Imagine that you've just had a baby. Imagine you've had a baby by cesarean section and the buggy is put in the boot of the car when they go off to work, leaving you no way to go to the shops, no keys to be able to leave the house because you can't get back in again. And all of this can be justified by jealousy. So, it's because I love you. It's because I'm terrified. I don't feel that I'm good enough for you, and somebody else is going to love you more than me, and then you're going to leave me. That's why I did these things. That's why I don't want you to go anywhere else. There's always justification for isolation. In fact, all of these tactics of abuse. Stalking is the one thing that we are really concerned about. If we're hearing that someone's being stalked, that's going to be a hair on the back of your neck moment for us as support workers. Stalking could look like receiving unwanted gifts, unwanted communication, damaging your property. Have you gone outside and seen things in the garden that have been damaged? Have you just planted the most beautiful plants and you've come out the next morning and there's no flowers left on them? Repeatedly spying on you, making threats. Maybe they're making threats by a third party, so somebody else is watching you or making threats against you. Vandalising property or damaging property. Stalking is one of the most terrifying things because of the time it takes out of a perpetrator's world. Just imagine sending 40, 50, 60 text messages every day to somebody when those text messages aren't wanted. That's a lot of time out of a perpetrator's day, isn't it? To be able to instill that fear. And of course, physical and sexual abuse. And we all know what that's likely to be like. Beating, kicking, burning, biting. There's been the most horrific abuse over the years. And we do know that victims of domestic abuse die. We do know that they are seriously injured and sometimes permanently. So all of these things are of real concern when there is physical and sexual abuse within a relationship. We also know that victims of domestic abuse are not likely to be visible to us. For me, the reason why this conference is so great is because we don't need to see you. We don't need to know you. You don't need to give us your name. So if you're sitting there as a victim of domestic abuse, this maybe is the opportunity for you to start talking to us, because maybe you've not been visible to us before. 80% actually of victims of domestic abuse are not likely to be visible to us. So actually, and they could have been victims for 20 plus years. My greatest story is of a 72-year-old and an 84-year-old that lived in the refuge where I sit right now, fighting one evening and having to come in and tell them off like they were both school children. 84 in a refuge, that's pretty sad, really, isn't it? We need people to start talking to us and receive help earlier. So what you might notice, people that are being withdrawn or unusually depressed for no apparent reason. And we know that in the world that we live in at the moment with COVID, people are becoming more withdrawn. It is more difficult. So it's, we can't just make assumptions that that's because they're victims of domestic abuse. But if you think then that maybe there's a lowering of their self-confidence, lots of language of self-blame, it's my fault, if only I'd, feelings of shame, all of these things are what you're going to see in victims of domestic abuse. Having injuries that don't seem consistent with the explanation. So, bruises, fingertip marks, bruises on your arms, and what things that you might notice where somebody's been grabbed. Technology use such as social media platforms being monitored. A partner or family member that's always there, and that's really difficult actually to see. I had a dad that was very poorly for a number of years. I went to every health appointment. I'm not a perpetrator of domestic abuse, but there's a big difference between being there because you're frightened of what's going to be said behind your back and being there because you care. Negative coping strategies in victims such as substance misuse and self-harm, that's going to be very common. Imagine being frightened every day. Every day, of course, we are going to take on negative coping strategies. And you might be able to see finances being controlled. I think the biggest thing for me is if you're sitting with somebody and they are leaping out of their skin because their phone is gone, and you note that it's their partner or family member that's phoning and then phoning again and again and again and again and again, well, potentially that's quite a key indicator that's a victim of domestic abuse. Minimizing language. Absolutely, we are going to be noticing minimizing language. It was only, they just, it's going to be quite difficult, isn't it, for when we take responsibility for us to know who's the victim and who's the perpetrator. I'm definitely not a police officer, because I wouldn't like to walk into a situation where both are blaming each other and I don't know who's who. And the only way really that I know how to tell a difference between a victim and a perpetrator is the language that they use. A perpetrator is likely to blame everybody, and a victim is likely to blame themselves. So it was only a slap. It was only a punch. They didn't know what they were doing because they were drunk. It's not really his or her fault. They've just been made redundant. We've all been locked in a house together. It's been really difficult. It was an argument, and it doesn't happen very often. They can be really lovely. It was stress. It's only when they drink. All of these things are minimizing language that we might hear that might alert us to the fact, actually, that you would be a victim of domestic abuse. So how are you going to ask these questions? Well, the one thing that you must do is ask in private. It's really imperative that you ask these questions in private. And if you are a health visitor, if you work for the health service, if your professional role includes working with victims of domestic abuse, please normalise the question. I sat at the hospital with my sister a couple of years ago and listened to a nurse asking the most incredible questions about domestic abuse. Her approach was impeccable. Everything she did and the way in which she treated the lady that was in front of her was extraordinary. And I wrote to the hospital and asked her name and made sure that she was very aware of how great she'd been. But actually, when the curtains went back, it was my sister's next door neighbour. So there was no privacy really, was there? And I don't know what else she could have done, because hospital cubicles are not private when there's a paper thin curtain between the two of you. But sometimes we have to normalise these questions. Use non-judgmental tones and voice and language, because we can't judge people. If somebody who may have been a victim of domestic abuse for 20 years chooses to speak to you and you judge them, they won't speak to anybody else. If somebody tells you they're a victim of domestic abuse, note it down. Even if you're a friend or family member, note it down, because it could be that actually they can come back and use that information in the future if they should need to. And especially if you're noting any threats to harm an adult or a child, you need to make sure that we're telling the right people so that we can get some help for that family and offer to refer them on to other services. Again, you don't need to be an expert. That's what we're for. There are ways in which we can signpost across the county. So if somebody is at real danger, you need to ensure that you call 999 or they're on their behalf, or do so yourself. That's going to get you an immediate response. Although when I say immediate, remember, there are lots of victims of domestic abuse. You are not alone. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men is going to be victims of domestic abuse, actually. So there is possibly going to be a queue in front of you. So the police are going to take some time to get back to you. Don't give up. They will get to you. They will talk to you. If it's not emergency, then you can call 101, although there is a small charge for that, but you can call 101. We are incredibly lucky in Kent with the domestic abuse services that we've got. If you need support right now, or if you want to find out more about those services, you can call 0808 1689 111, which is victim support. Now, victim support are going to triage you, and they're going to then refer you on to other agencies if that's what you want, with your consent, and if they feel that that's necessary for you. Otherwise, they're going to support you from themselves. And at the bottom is a list of the services across Kent that are commissioned by Kent County Council, and someone will give you a call back and support you. So if anything that I've said today is ringing true with you, if you're now feeling that you would really like some support, please, tomorrow, if not tonight, pick up the phone. And if you can't talk to one of us, then talk to your friend, talk to your GP, but talk to somebody. Across the county, there are one-stop shops which you can go to. Those one-stop shops have varying different people across the county. They're not open face-to-face at the moment. So in the Thanet area, for example, you would get a police officer that would attend. You would get somebody that does my job that's going to attend. You'd get an IDVA. You're going to get somebody often from early help that might be there. We might have campfire and rescue there. And it's very possible and likely that you would have a solicitor. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to give any details. You can go along and completely anonymously give some get some free advice. At the moment, most of the one-stop shops across the county aren't face-to-face because of COVID, but there is a telephone number for each one-stop shop available on the website. So if you want to find out about your local one-stop shop, you need to go onto the internet, and www.domesticabuseservices.org is the email address that you want. So www.domesticabuseservices.org. Just Google it and it will bring up a map. You can click on that map and find out what service is local to you. And this is what it looks like. If you are wanting refuge accommodation, or you want to call a national number that's available 24 hours a day, you would call National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 24/7. If you are a male and want male specific advice, then you can call 0808 802 4040. And please know that you can call, any male can call any of our services. They're not exclusively for females, but that is Respect is a service that is there for males. There's also details of Gallup, which is an LGBT service, on 0800 999 5428. And Karma Nirvana details are also there. They would be able to support you if you are likely to be a victim of honour-based violence. So as I can see David's face now, that means that I've come to the end of my time and I've run over by 1 minute. That's very rare for me. Usually I'm running over by hours.
Well, Tina, I have to say thank you so much. And, you know, I've known you for a number of years and I've sat through various presentations, but I'm always learn something new when you do present. And again, I'm just incredibly grateful for you giving your time tonight. We do have some questions that have come through already. And one of the first one is from Rebecca Jordan. It's the most popular one so far. And she's asked if you could give an example of a normalized question.
A normalized question. So just ask the question. Don't pussyfoot around it. Don't stutter. Don't feel embarrassed. I remember the best example of not normalizing a question is a police officer that I went out with on one occasion, and he was on our police officers use a number of questions to assess your level of risk, and a police officer said to a victim, "I'm really sorry, I have to ask you this question. I'm going to note down your answer, but does he do anything of a sexual nature that makes you feel bad or hurts you?" Up came the pocketbook in front of his face. He's already apologized for asking the question. So already you feel bad. You're thinking, oh my goodness, what are you going to ask me? You're then talking to a piece of paper. You're not talking to somebody. Find a way in which you feel comfortable in asking that question, and then just ask the question. It's very surprising because we will have victims of domestic abuse who have given very limited information to other agencies, and then when you actually ask the question, you get the answers. So find a way that you feel comfortable with. If you're a professional, find your own way of asking those questions. If you're using the dash question, please use the wording that is on the dash. So a dash is a domestic abuse, stalking and harassment risk indicator checklist. That's how we check your level of risk. So if you're a professional, just ask the questions as they are on your dashes, because they've been written in a particular way. If you're not and you need to ask your friend, just be kind and ask them. Don't be embarrassed, because they will be embarrassed to answer you.
Absolutely. And the main thing is ask a question, be curious, you know, people tend not to get offended. That's what I've always found. The next question has come from Chloe White, and she's asked or said, it'd be interesting to know more about what the nurse said and how best to ask and approach, as most victims don't recognize that they are victims.
That's extremely true, that most victims don't recognise they're victims of domestic abuse. And that's why when you're asking as a friend, you're going to get that minimising language. So actually, the nurse was really grateful for the feedback. And more grateful for the feedback, because she'd been saying exactly the same thing to her managers, that actually you're right, getting us to ask these very intrusive questions. There, for anyone that doesn't know, for us, there were 24 questions that you're asking, and it does include a sexual abuse question. It does include a question about child contact. And she'd been saying for quite some time, what I want is a room to be able to go off and have that conversation with somebody if I feel that they're a victim of domestic abuse. And for a while, they were given a room to be able to take somebody off to have that conversation. So actually, there was some real benefit from that. But I think she was just glad to know that somebody felt that what she was doing and how she was asking those questions was the right way to ask, because that's what we're all going to be a bit concerned about, is that confidence to ask that question. You just need to ask it, particularly if it's your friend.
Great, thank you, Tina. I have to say, I'm not the only one. I'm seeing some of the chat come through. There have been a couple of people who said thank you for the presentation. Let's have a look at the next one. Let's see. So, somebody has commented, basically talking about what we've just said around tone, and that she said she's really noticed in particular over the past few days of working how the right tone can encourage engagement. And I think that's some of the skill that DA practitioners have, is actually sort of picking up and reflecting really early on in the conversation, just how people are speaking and how they're answering. It is such a really key skill. Would you agree with that, Tina?
Oh, absolutely. I think that that's that thing about normalizing, isn't it? That, if you're a health visitor, we ask these questions of everybody, and then that's it. You've completely normalized that. Having that, the more anxious you are of asking the question, the reason that police officer put that piece of paper in front of it, or that pocketbook in front of his face, is because he didn't feel confident in asking that question. He didn't want to have to listen to those awful things that victim might have said about sexual abuse. He hadn't been called out to a allegation of rape. He'd been called out to an incident, probably a new police officer. And actually that feedback was, of course, he was given feedback to say that that's not going to be helpful. So yeah, your tone is really important. If you're talking to your friends, get them a cup of tea, take them away that's somewhere where that's quiet, that they would feel confident. And when they don't want to give you a positive answer, don't judge them. Victims of domestic abuse often take years to disclose domestic abuse. Don't judge them if they're not answering you. Don't push for information because they're not going to come back to talk to you again. Just be there. They will come back to you when they're ready.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And really leading on from that, there's a question from Helen Andrews. She says, once they've told you that they're in an abusive relationship, would it be right to ask the victim what help they want from you?
Definitely, absolutely, definitely. So you now have got the greatest skill. You've got those services in your local area. The fact that you're sitting listening to me when you could be eating your dinner or drink, or maybe you are drinking a large glass of wine, but you could be eating your dinner and you're listening to me, actually means that you care about this. What are your local services? So that if there's somebody that you suspect is a victim of domestic abuse, and that's the reason why you've come to listen to us today, well, then find out where your local services are, and then you can tell that person immediately. The one thing that's really important is that we get consent. If you push somebody to do something that they're not ready to do, they're not going to talk to you again. If you don't, and you're gentle and you're supportive, well, then actually they may come back to you tomorrow with more information, or next week with even more information. And that is difficult because you have to look after yourself too. You've got to listen to this information. So, you've got to look after yourself too. So if somebody's told you something and is forbidden you to tell anybody else, well, then maybe you can call these services and get a little bit of advice for yourself and receive more information, because all of us would be able to help you if you're concerned about a friend or family member.
Thank you. Now, this is an absolutely incredible question, and we can probably be here until about this time tomorrow if you really go
Oh,
for this, Tina. So get ready. Why does domestic abuse exist? What are the perpetrator's motives or reasons for doing it?
well, if I knew who asked this question.
I can tell you, let's have a look.
What's your first name?
Bear with me a second. I need to now find the question. It's
Oh,
moved on.
that's all right. Let me just say that if I knew the exact details to the answer to that question, I would be a very wealthy woman because I've written a book on it somewhere along the line. My personal belief is that it's almost like a child throwing a tantrum. What you learn is a particular behaviour gets you what you want. So often perpetrators of domestic abuse have learned from a very young age often that a particular behavior will get you what you want. So for example, if my husband's, I don't know why I tell the whole world this, but I'm just about to tell you something that I'm going to ask you not to repeat to anyone else. But I'm afraid of tulips. It's a bit odd, it's a bit bizarre, but there you go. It comes from when I was 4, my granddad held me over a tulip and told me that when it opens, a black dragon flies out. And 2 days later, he was a police officer and he was killed on duty. So I suspect it was about the grief of losing him rather than the dragon. And please know, I know there's no dragon inside of a tulip, but I don't like them. So to control me, my husband would buy me a bunch of tulips. And now, if he then asked for steak for dinner that night, believe me, I'd have gone and begged, borrowed, or stolen steak to give him for dinner that night. Now, it's a tactic that he learned. You know, he knows me better than anybody else. And so, therefore, there are those tactics that come along. And I think it's in order for you to get what you want, you know, and that might be not to lose your partner, not to lose somebody that you believe that you love, but it's about ensuring that you keep that relationship going and that you get what you want. Very similar to a 5-year-old that learns that if they lay on the floor and scream long enough in Tesco's, they're likely to get the Smarties that they wanted because mum or dad are so embarrassed about that behaviour they give in. I believe it's something similar to that. And no perpetrator of domestic abuse, in my belief, started off with a great, wonderful, amazing life. Something has happened somewhere along the line that has meant that they've treated somebody in this way later down in their relationship. So why do they do it? To get their needs met is the short answer.
Crikey. That I've never heard, or really didn't think you'd be able to get through that in 5 minutes, because that is one heck of a question. And that was asked by Anna Redmond. So, Anna, thank you.
Anna, great question. David, did you have anything that you would think that was different to that?
No, I will always bow to your experience and knowledge on this.
And can I say, for any professionals, I choose to give I don't, if I'm working with a victim of domestic abuse, ever disclose that I was a victim of domestic abuse myself. It isn't necessary. Your understanding and your knowledge is what will engage your victims with you. So I've chosen to disclose that in this room. It's not a secret. I train hundreds of police officers and hundreds of people over the years, and don't disclose that in training quite naturally. Sometimes I do, and I chose to tonight. You don't have to do that to be able to engage somebody else.
Thank you. So there's a question that's come through from Bryony Bishop, and she's asking, what are some of the ways that you can show someone who doesn't realize they're a victim of abuse that the behavior isn't healthy?
I think that some of that is about reflecting. Thank you, Bryony, and hi. I think some of that is reflecting back, isn't it? You know, if you've been harmed, it's not usual for somebody to make you feel guilty or somebody to physically harm you. I think it's that gentle reflection back. How did that make you feel? Why do you think that they did that? That's unusual. You know, what happened after that? It's that gentle reflection back, I think, because none of us, the reason that we've told you about it is because we know that it's not quite natural and or normal in a relationship. So actually having that reflection back to say, I'm really sorry that you were hurt, or you didn't deserve to be treated in that way. It's just that gentle reflection back, validation that what they've said is it wasn't kind. It shouldn't have happened to you. I can't imagine that there was anything that you would ever have done or said that would have warranted that behaviour or making you feel that way. So validating what's been said and reflecting back that actually, instead of saying, oh, it's really wrong and you need to leave, how did that make you feel? That must have really upset you. Is a good way to be gentle and allowing someone to reflect on what's been said back to them.
Thank you. Next question has come from Helen Andrews, and she's picking up on financial abuse. She says, I work for a high street bank, and I'd like more advice on supporting people around financial abuse, and then also spotting signs when somebody could be experiencing financial abuse.
It's interesting because with our new coercion and control, well, they're not that new now, actually, are they? But I've been doing this so long, they feel like they're new. With our coercion and control laws, financial abuse is one of the things that police officers are going to be looking for as evidence. And you know, you're going to be right. It is really difficult for us to be able to prove that. There wouldn't naturally be anything wrong with somebody's wages going into somebody else's bank. But all of their wages going into somebody else's bank, you know, is there a joint savings account that's going on alongside there as well? I know that a member of my own family tells me that she's not very good with money and she's very glad that her husband is. And so a good percentage of her money goes into his bank account. Some of that goes into their savings account. Some of that goes and pays the bills. And then she keeps some of that money herself so that, you know, she's not completely deprived of money. That's because she's not very good with money. So I think that it is going to be, sometimes it is going to be easy to see, but on its own, financial abuse is going to be difficult to watch. For me, one of the things that we need to be mindful of is having those questions about separate accounts. So if there's one joint account, actually, could there be two accounts? It's one of the things that happens to us really often is getting somebody opened to be able to open a bank account when they've gone into refuge is virtually impossible. It literally should be the simplest thing in the world, and it's incredibly difficult. You don't have any bills in your name when you go into refuge. We don't have the actual address is never available in a refuge. What you have is a post office box most of the time, and it's really difficult to open a post office box, a bank account with a post office box. So for you, you know, keeping an eye on the fact that if somebody's body language and all of the other things that you're noticing as a victim is you're going to notice those things as well as potentially that financial abuse. Is there a saving account in both names? If both bank accounts, you can see how much money is going out, how much money is being saved. Very often there won't be any savings at all. So, but any information that you could give me a ring on about how we can open bank accounts, because we've had a lady here now for 4 months and we're still struggling to open a bank account for her. So, you know, those things are difficult even after you've left an abusive relationship, especially when you've left everything of your world behind and doesn't have any identification to be able to open a new account. Did that answer the question?
I think it did. But if you disagree, Helen, then do pop another question through, prefacing it with follow-up, and then we can pick that up. I just want to say I have been getting queries from somebody who has experienced domestic abuse. I'm not going to publish the questions because it would identify them. But one of the questions they've asked is there an end to it? So in other words, are they going to have to still live with the feelings that they've had as a result of the abuse for the rest of their life?
Absolutely
I have
not.
signposted them. Thank you. I've signposted them as well, just so that you know, onto victim support and to another agency as well. But Tina, sorry, I interrupted you.
Absolutely not. It's really important. So often we can help you with practical support. We can talk to you about housing. We can talk to you about child contact matters. We can signpost you to solicitors. But actually, most victims of domestic abuse need some emotional support as a result of this. You know, when you've been going to bed terrified, that has an impact on your mental health. And one of the things that we notice in refuge is that people walk into refuge on a Monday morning and they seem very together. They're probably very tearful. They're definitely terrified because they don't know what their rooms are going to be like, and they don't know what the other people are going to be like, and they're going to be really, really frightened. Within a couple of days, you feel slightly better about the world because your room wasn't rat infested, although we did have a mouse recently. But your room isn't usually rat infested, and you know it's okay. It's better than you thought, because of course refuge is an awful place to go. That's how we make money from comic relief. Because they're never going to show what it really does look like. We had a bag of Harrods teddies donated We have 4 children running around with a panda under each arm this afternoon. Very, very happy indeed. And a 63-year-old woman that's legged it off into her room as she's pinched a panda out the bag as well, because she loves pandas. That's not what you imagine for a refuge to be like. But all of those people potentially are going to need some emotional support, some counselling to be able to manage those behaviours. And for people, if you've got post-traumatic stress, then that's going to mean some additional work. Maybe you're going to need to go and see your local mental health provider or your local GP. But for me, all I can tell you is that it took me a long time to forgive myself for dragging my children away from their home and my family. And it took all the time of living in refuge. I blamed myself for all of the abuse, because actually, if I'd have been a better wife, if I'd have been a better lover, if I'd have done all the things that I should have done better, maybe my children at 5 and 9 wouldn't have been living in a refuge, because that's horrific, isn't it? And what I learned actually after that period, once I'd got into my own home, is that there's nothing that I could have done differently. No matter what I did, it was wrong. Often there was a tactic that actually was deliberately done to make it feel like it was my fault, when it definitely wasn't my fault. And when you can learn to actually start to believe that it's not you, then you know that you're on a real road to recovery. That's when your counselling will become easier. That's when talking to somebody will feel better to you. And I absolutely did not believe that I would ever be able to sit here and say that I really know that this wasn't me. And it happens quite quickly once you're not being abused. And the difficulty is, if you've got children, often you're going to be continually abused at child contact handovers. You're going to be abused when you sit opposite your ex-partner at your son or daughter's wedding when they've reached 10, 15 years time. But there absolutely is an end to what you're feeling right now, but you need to seek the right advice and support to be able to come to terms with what's happened to you and forgive yourself, because that's often what keeps us trapped in that cycle of abuse in our minds, is that we need to forgive ourselves. We couldn't have done anything differently. You did your best on that particular day with the circumstances that you had.
Thank you, Tina. Questions are still coming through. One from Peter Williams, and he's asking what your thoughts on Freedom, Phoenix, and Recovery Toolkit programs, which are in place across the county to help female survivors and victims of abuse. So what do you think of them?
Well, you press the button, Peter, and now off I'm going to go, because I'm very passionate about recovery programs and Phoenix and Freedom. So we have for anyone that doesn't know, the Freedom program is a 12-week program that looks at the tactics of a perpetrator, and very simply does that for 12 weeks. We look at the dynamics of power and control. We look at why perpetrators believe that they could feel that way, and why victims sometimes, blame themselves when absolutely they shouldn't. Even going back to things like, fairy stories. Why is it in fairy stories all of our heroes are our males, and all of the victims are the girls? Why is that? I absolutely love Merida because she's a go-getting girl. So that's what we look at in Freedom. Across the Kent area now, actually, lots of areas are favouring something called the Phoenix programme. Now, the Phoenix programme is a 10-week programme, and we do for 3 weeks look at the tactics of a perpetrator. What we also look at, though, is how we can help build your self-esteem. What do boundaries look like? What are the effects on children? And actually, how can you help your children? So there are lots of other weeks. There are lots of other things that we discuss in the Phoenix program. The thing for me, and the greatest thing for me with the Phoenix program, is that we're writing additional inserts. So the Freedom program was written many years ago. I was trained 14 years ago in the Freedom program, and it's written for women when their perpetrators are males. And we know that victims of domestic abuse can be males, they can be females, we know that they can be parents, they can be children, they can be intimate partners. So for me, what we're looking at in Phoenix is, now that we've got it running across the county, we're looking at particular inserts so that we can have a male program for a victim, a Phoenix program specifically for male victims, that we can have a program for those within the LGBT community, and that we are at the moment, we're writing a program that's more simplified for anybody that may have learning disabilities. So we can make this work for everybody, because what we need to make sure is that it's fit for purpose, and freedom only fits if you're a female victim and your perpetrator is male. I absolutely advise anybody who can get their name on a program, just go onto your local service. Somewhere their website is going to be able to tell you how to refer. I absolutely believe that you should go on these programs. And I have to tell you, in all the years of doing my job, and I've done lots of different things in this job, my very favorite thing to do is facilitating programs, and I find Phoenix amazing. So if you're on the list and you're in the Thanet or Dover area, you might be seeing me again, because I love to facilitate.
And she's very good at it as well. A follow-up from Helen, who was speaking earlier regarding the financial abuse. And actually, I've got a bit of a follow-up on that. And somebody else has commented around businesses understanding the impact of domestic abuse. Have a look at the conference program. There are some events that are happening over the next couple of days, which are specifically about making businesses aware of domestic abuse, and also the reasons why it's a positive thing to create an environment where domestic abuse can be managed safely within the workplace. We've got a really great presentation from somebody from E&Y, and also somebody from Hestia, who've got a dedicated program to making businesses domestic abuse prepared. So if you haven't registered for that, please do go ahead and register for that.
And if you are, for anyone in the room that is a victim of domestic abuse, on Monday, I'm going to do another presentation about safety planning. So if that's something that you would find useful, I'm registered to watch 5 of these different things that are going on over the next couple of weeks. It's very exciting. So, please do join in and register for the other presenters that are going around. But if you want to know a bit more about safety planning, that's going to be Monday at 2:00, I think.
Sounds about right. Yes. And Helen, you'd asked or said that Tina could get in touch. The best thing to do would be if you go to the front page of the DA CAIDUS conference website. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's an email there. If you could email your details, then that can be passed through to Tina, and you can get in touch with each other then, if that's all okay. So we do have further questions. Let's see.
And let me tell you, we were worried about nobody asking any questions. David was threatening to ask me the most difficult questions in case nobody asked one. So thank you, guys.
And I have to say, I haven't committed to not asking that question. So from Patricia Dillon Russell, she's said that she's heard that people are most vulnerable immediately after they leave an abuser. Would you agree?
I would certainly agree. We know that most murders happen at the point of leaving or having just left. And it is at the point of leaving as well. So often if you're a victim of domestic abuse and you're planning on leaving, maybe you're going to feel guilty because you told somebody else about it. Maybe you're going to be terrified of being caught because you're leaving. Maybe you feel guilty because you're removing children away from their mother or their father. There is going to be a change in your persona, in your everything about you is going to be more nervous than it was before. And perpetrators are absolutely in tune to your behaviour. So it isn't just after you've left, it's at the point of leaving that you're going to be more at risk. And that's the point, absolutely without question, that you need to talk to one of us in our local agencies, because we will get a safety plan together with you and help you to leave in a safer way. Yes, absolutely. As you leave, you're more at risk than once you've left.
Grand. We are actually heading towards our official end of time, but we do have some time in reserve, so we're going to carry on with the questions. Juliana Morford has asked, how do you make someone trust you when he or she is looking for help?
It's everything about your attitude and about your safety. So one of the things for us is that we have an A4 piece of paper that is our confidentiality agreement. So before anyone opens their mouth to speak to us, we're going to tell you exactly what we're going to do with the information that is provided to us. Because sometimes, of course, we're going to be learning about maybe elder abuse, maybe something that is a child protection issue. We're going to hear things that we just can't keep a secret. We need to ensure that victims and children, particularly children, are safe. So be very clear. If you are a professional, what are you going to do with that information? I think that's the first thing, because people then can choose what they tell you. They can choose to withhold information because actually, I don't want social services involved. I'm not going to tell you that bit about my children. But what you find is, if you're honest before you start speaking, is that if you are caring and genuine, people will forget about the confidentiality agreement and they're going to tell you their stuff anyway. So be very clear about what you're going to do about that information, and be interested. You are interested. You are sitting in that room listening to me. So the very fact that you're here means that I would want to talk to you. You care about me. You're genuinely interested in my world. So be clear, if you're a professional, in advance what you're going to do with that information, and be genuine with somebody. That's how you get them to trust you.
Thank you. A question from Chloe White. She says that she'd be interested to know more about the process that happens when someone contacts one of the support agencies so that she can be better informed.
So if you're going to call victim support are going to do an assessment with you. If they believe, and that's the dash risk assessment questions. So if you are standard risk, they're going to continue to support you. If you are medium risk, you are going to get consent sought for you to be referred out to your local support area. So, and then if you're high risk, you should receive a call within 24 hours or 48 if it's the weekend. If you're deemed to be medium risk, then you're going to get a call within 5 days. And often it doesn't feel like that, because you've got an unknown number that's calling you. You haven't answered the phone. We won't leave a message because we don't know whether that's going to place you at risk. So we're never going to leave messages on your phone until we've sought your consent to be able to do that. We're not going to email you if you've given your email address in a referral form. We're not going to do any of those things. We're not going to do anything to make you at risk, but we are going to attempt contact within 5 days. If you haven't heard from us, then go back to the place that you rang in the first place, because it could be that we're calling you off withheld numbers. It could be that we've got the wrong digit on the telephone number. We'd welcome you calling us back again to say, hang on, here's me. Can you make sure that you give me a call? So from then, each individual agency is going to ask you those dash questions again. We're going to be very clear with our confidentiality statement. Sometimes we're going to refer you on to other services that are going to support you alongside us if you're high risk. So there's something called a multi-agency risk assessment conference. And if we believe that you're high risk, then we might refer you to them. We might refer you to social services. But our confidentiality agreements are going to make it very clear what we're going to do with your information before you talk to us. And then that support will be tailored to your needs. So we could just give you 4 weeks of support. We could just signpost you to other agencies. We could be supporting you for a year. It depends on what you need.
That's great. And I think the key thing from there is that we listen to what people are saying and then work with them to agree an outcome that they want, and then work with them all the way down the line to get to that. And it is just such a person-centered response. Lisa Jane Jennings is asking a question which it might be a bit of a long answer. So I'll leave it up to you as to how you do answer it. She says, Tina, can I gain an insight into Phoenix program as a support worker?
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's a session with Iona coming up in the week about the Phoenix program. So I would sign up to that, because you're going to get it's only half an hour, so you're not going to get in depth, but what you are going to get is more details of what each week looks like. If not, if you Google the Phoenix program, Kent, you're going to get a lovely website coming up that's going to give you more information as well.
And if you look on the Q&A, Sarah has already put the details of the event that Iona is going to be running. So it is Tuesday the 8th at 2 p.m. Go ahead and register if you haven't already done so. Somebody has also asked, is the, um, 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 is the, um support that's offered free of charge? And the answer to that,
100%.
absolutely.
Yes.
Um,
And you know, the most difficult people, there are two groups of people that are the most difficult for us to support. One is those that have got no recourse to public funding. So getting you into refuge can sometimes be difficult, but definitely not impossible. But most often it's those people that live in those massive great houses that are quite affluent, never got access to the money that's in the bank, but maybe there's maybe a couple of £1 million in the bank. That's not beyond the people that we've supported. And telling somebody is massive, because is it going to mean that little Johnny can't go to private school now? You know, if you're living in a big house, nobody can hear you cry. Nobody can hear you scream. If you live in a council estate, 5 neighbours will hear you. So actually, it's the one great thing about the services that are provided in Kent. Refuge is going to be about means testing, but for many refugees, even if you've got money in the bank, we're going to help you. If you're working, we're going to help you, although a lot of that is paid for by housing benefit. But if it's not refuge, everything is free.
Absolutely. And I think one of the really things that we're very, very lucky about in Kent is that we've got money to be a little bit more flexible in terms of how we respond. So speaking for victim support, we can actually buy people a train ticket if they need to get from one place to another. I recently bought somebody a microwave because they were put into a new place and they had no means of being able to cook. So that was something. I just went online to the Asda website, got them that. We bought mobile phones for people because they can't have their phone, they can't access benefit if they don't have access to a mobile phone. So we can, and I know that we're not alone. Absolutely, like Oasis, we do try and think outside the box in terms of the support that we can offer.
Yeah, but if you want a microwave, go to David. Don't come to me, because I've
It,
probably not got the money for that.
I have to say, it was 35 quid. I got it on sale, and it was the last one in Asda in North Kent. Um, I don't have a lot of money, and I try and make it stretch. So there's a question coming from Anna Stepino. She says that she's a therapist and she works with couples as well as individuals. How could she help or signpost the victim when in couples therapy and the other is present?
Oh,
That is tough,
oh,
isn't it?
oh, that's a difficult question.
Mm.
Um, I mean, you can be quite creative. If you are, it's probably unlikely that you've got a men's and a women's toilet, because of course it could be that the person you're concerned about is a male. It could be that you quite naturally start putting posters up in your on your doors, on the back of your doors in the toilets, or maybe I don't know that in counselling having DA posters around the room is going to feel like a very therapeutic environment. Maybe start putting out a occasional table in the corner where maybe you've got posters and you've got other things that are there. Maybe the perpetrator in that situation actually would be really receptive to be getting some additional support. So it's one of the things that we really lack in Kent is perpetrator programs, but we do have CDAP in Kent, which is a 27-week program. You know, maybe if you're noticing nuances of abuse and things are being brought into the room, there is no judgment for anyone that's a perpetrator of domestic abuse on CDAP. It's something that if you want to change your behaviours and be better, actually, that you can join the CDAP groups. Unfortunately, again, exactly the same as the opposite to Freedom. At the moment, they're run for males rather than for females, but who knows in the future if we had enough females that but wanted to make changes to their behaviour. I think it's really difficult, because to say something in front of the alleged perpetrator could be placing that victim at more risk, and maybe that is that subtle placing of leaflets and pamphlets around, putting stuff on the inside of the door so that people can add telephone numbers to their phones. There's also ingenious things like tampon holders that you might be able to purchase from Women's Aid that have got telephone numbers in. There's even barcodes you can stick on the back of things that have got the Women's Aid helpline number. So you can be a bit more inventive if you're prepared to put in a couple of pounds. And actually, there's probably a pot of money somewhere that you might be able to access to get things like that. That's the only thing that I can think of, because actually making those suggestions, asking those questions directly in couples counselling may increase the victim's risk.
Absolutely. And I mean, I found was in Canterbury Hospital. And the consultant was just talking to me about what I did, and so I explained. And they pretty much took my hand off to get posters and leaflets, because they do have all of the leaflets for different kinds of, medical issues. And they just popped a couple of them around the CAIDUS work in there, and then they put them on the doors in the loo. And that it was really fantastic. First of all, that the consultant, was clued in enough, yeah, it was a really good outcome as far as I was concerned.
And there, you on the website, which the details are still up, I think, of the website where the DA services are. There is a section on there actually with some posters and information. So you can get that. It won't even cost you anything. You can just print them off and stick them on the back of the wall.
And if you have a look at the CAIDUS Twitter feeds as well, for example, so Oasis, Victim Support, Look Ahead, or Clarion, we often tweet out stuff which you could just save and print off from there as well. Chloe has just done a follow-up to say thank you, and she sorts out temporary fostering for people's pets while they're fleeing. And Chloe, as a dog owner, I can only say thank you, because I think that would be the one thing that would stop me leaving if I had to. So from me, thank you for the work that you do.
We've literally the very high risk victim of domestic abuse in Maidstone, and the thing that stopped her leaving now for 2 years has been her rabbit. The Dogs Trust has been incredible with our dogs. We're so lucky in Kent that we've got services for both dogs and cats. So that's incredible. But again, if that's the person you've told your secrets to is your Labrador, how could you ever think about leaving them behind, particularly if you fear that they might be harmed? So absolutely, the Dogs Trust is the way to go if you need to have your dog fostered while you go into refuge.
Absolutely, I can second that and endorse them. Quick question from Bryony Bishop, and this looks like it may well be the last one unless anybody else gets typing. Do you have to get a victim's permission to make a referral, or can you call a DA service to share your concern and get them help?
So you would have to, if you are making a multi-agency risk assessment referral, so a MARIC referral, which would be unusual unless you're working for an agency, it would be something that you wouldn't do that for your friends. If you're making a MARIC referral, you could do that without consent. If you've got concerns from a child or adult's perspective because someone is that seriously at risk, you wouldn't need consent because you would make an adult social services or a children's social services referral yourself. But every other circumstance, you would need to ask consent, because nobody is working with us if they don't consent to that. We can be the best worker that we've ever been, but if somebody's been talking about you behind your back, if someone's been telling tales behind your back, how are they ever going to trust us to talk to us? So from a legal standpoint, you can't make referrals. We can't talk to anybody without their consent unless they are high risk and a MARIC referral has been made.
What we could say, though, that if somebody were to call up to one of our agencies on behalf of their friend, we wouldn't be able to obviously do anything direct, again, without the consent of the individual. But what we could do is talk to you as their friend, pass along some information. And it might be actually that with the conversation that you have with the DA agency, you're going to be informed enough to be able to have that conversation with your friend that may actually reduce the barriers that they've got about making that first contact, so they could then go ahead and make contact directly themselves.
And because I've been doing this job for quite a long time, I've got a friend that lives in Liverpool that I haven't seen him for many, many years. He went down to Age Concern last week, sat next to a lady who he clearly was very unhappy. She was very distressed. She had quite some serious bruising up her arm. And while I was sitting trying to actually write the presentation for on Monday, my phone rang and I answered the phone, and he said to me, "Teen, I'm sitting with this woman and her husband's hurt. Would you talk to her for me?" Well, of course I did. So she now knows the local service, and she's been able to get some support from them. So sometimes the inquiries come from all over the place. Say, look, we don't have to give our names. Let's phone the DA service together. Let's see what support they're going to give, because no one needs to know. You don't have to give your name, and I can't see you. So absolutely, sit with your friends and just phone together. That's a really good way of getting that information, getting the ideas of what we can do support you without doing something so terrifying as actually, disclosing all of your whereabouts and who you are to the world.
And the thing to remember as well, even during COVID, we are still working, we're still delivering services. So where you would have had a one-stop shop that people could walk into, those don't exist because we are in tier 3, and it was before we went into tier 3 as well. But we have the virtual one-stop shops. So regardless of where you live in Kent or Medway, pop onto the DA services website. You'll find that it's on screen now, the web link. Say where you are, and it will give you the details of how you can access that one-stop shop remotely. So don't let COVID be a deterrent for helping your friends to reach out, even if it isn't you as the victim. Lastly, we've got a follow-up from Peter Williams, who says, Tina, thanks for giving Kent CDAP a shout out with an exclamation mark.
It's a very valuable resource.
Amen. Peter is saying, all men attending are volunteers who have acknowledged their abuse of women and they want to change. Female perpetrators can access help and support from a bespoke charity, and they need to drop an email to Natalie at Care to Talk. So it's the word care, number 2, talk. So I just would suggest maybe go ahead and Google that if you know somebody who is a female perpetrator. So that is the last of our questions. Tina, thank you. You've been an absolute tour de force tonight, and we're 40 minutes over. So yeah, our fear of a lack of questions didn't materialize.
It absolutely didn't. Thank you for your help, David. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and your interest. You could change someone's life tomorrow. So get them to call somebody, sit with them and support them. It's all we need. Be kind.
And I was just going to do a virtual round of applause, both for Tina and for everybody else attending tonight. So take that from us. Thank you. To people that have asked questions as well, thank you, because it is really interesting getting feedback from all of you attending, because it helps us think about, well, you know, what do we need to maybe adapt in the future? And it just gives us some really good feedback as DA providers about understanding people's knowledge around domestic abuse. So again, thank you for that. You really, really helped build the conversation tonight. Some people had asked about whether or not they can access the slides later. There's going to be a recording of the webinar that's going to be made available to you shortly, so keep an eye out for your emails. If you enjoyed this event, and we really hope that you do, note that there's still time to register for the upcoming webinars. So your conference journey does not need to finish tonight. People had already shown interest around getting businesses DA prepped. Go ahead to www.daeverybodiesbusiness.org to register. The other thing I'd like to say is that you can keep the conversation going with the hashtag DAEverybodiesBusiness and hashtag NoCSpeakOut. So if you do use social media, please pop on there, say what your experience was like tonight, and use the hashtags again, DAEverybodiesBusiness and hashtag NoCSpeakOut. Finally, if the talk today has raised anything with you personally and you want to find out more about the services available, please visit www.domesticabuseservices.org.uk. It's the website which is up on the screen now. You can find out more about how you can refer into your local service. The other thing, the number is still up on the Q&A. Dial up 0808 168 9111. That's 24/7, 365 days a year. Either help somebody to reach out or reach out yourselves. Thank you. Good night.